So, for the past few weeks, I've been passionately raising dust about the entertainment industry. But today I want to deviate. I want to deviate a little and speak about the sons of God, the Benai Elohim. I'm not sure how many people have heard of this phrase, but when you're reading the Hebrew Bible, it's a phrase that occurs many times within the Bible. But when translated into the English Bible, this phrase is translated as the sons of God. Now, from our understanding as Christians, many times when we see this word, the sons of God, we automatically just think about that phrase to be angels, right? But in the Hebrew Bible, that's not correct. The Hebrew word for an angel is malak, and when you're talking about any angels, it's malakim, and malakim simply means messenger. And the Bible tells us that the angels are messengers of God. So malakim is completely different from Benai Elohim. Before I go on, let's stop at the phrase or at the word Elohim. When you hear Elohim today as a Christian, the first thing you think about is God. But that word Elohim is a plural word. It means gods. It's a plural word that means gods. However, in the context in which it was used, and now that word Elohim is actually a Semitic word from the ancient Near East civilization, and what it means is God. But because you had one God and you had many gods, anytime they were referring to the Most High God, it was always followed with a singular verb. So when you use that word, which is a plural word on its own, with a singular verb, immediately they understood that they were talking about the Most High God, Elohim, with a capital E. But whenever the plural verb is used with that plural word, they understood that you were talking about the many other gods. We see the same principle in my language, the Yoruba language. Usually refers to many people. So when you're addressing many people, you have the word ekason. It could be good afternoon to many people, right? But if you're referring to an elderly person or someone who has so much authority and someone who you're trying to communicate reverence for, but there's one person, you use the same word So if it was my father that I was going to address, I would say ekason sir. Although I'm talking to one person, but because of how revered he is in my sight, I use the word So that's the same principle. The Elohim, when used with a singular verb, is referring to the Most High God. And when used with a plural verb, because it is a plural word, it's referring to many gods. And so, coming back to the sons of God, they're talking about the sons of the divine beings, as it were, the divine beings, the sons of God. And there are many things you can say, but let's just go straight into scripture right now and see where the first time we see this phrase, Benai Elohim. We see it in Genesis chapter 6. The very first time we see it, it says, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, and they took them as wives. Some translation says that they were fair or they were lovely. But when you look at the Hebrew Bible, the intent and the purpose of that word means they were fit for purpose. These division of divine beings called the sons of God, the Benai Elohim, were not drawn by the beauty of men. I believe that they were driven by rebellion. They wanted a portion of the earth. In fact, before they descended, they already had this idea that it would be nice to come into the earth to have a stake or a portion on the earth. And I will show you through the scriptures. They wanted to spread their seed amongst the sons of men, to corrupt the image of God on the earth. These ones were in rebellion. And they had offsprings. The offsprings were called the Nephilims. Now, many times the English Bible just I wouldn't say randomly, but best as it can, translated the word Nephilim into giants or mighty ones. And when you see giants, as human beings, we tend to conjure huge, humongous human versions that are mighty. So we think about human beings, but are way bigger with 6 fingers and 6 toes. And, in our minds, we just think, oh, giants. But I don't think that the Nephilims were giants, because the sons of God, these benign Elohims, they had a physical body that was different from the makeup of man, that made it possible for them to mate with women. And what they brought forth was so grotesque that it terrified men on the earth at that time. And so let's look at another place where we see the sons of God. We see the sons of God, the benign Elohim, in Job chapter 1 and Job chapter 2. The Bible talks about a divine council being called, right? The sons of God came, and Satan, the adversary, came as well. Now, when God created Adam, Adam was a son of God on this earth, in this dominion. The Bible talks about the manifold works of God. The Bible talks about all dominions in the heavens, in the earth, and under the earth, in the sea. And so this earthly dominion was given to a son of God called Adam. Unfortunately, Adam lost his rights, his inheritance, and over to Satan, and Satan emerged as the god of this world. And so when the sons of God came, I believe that the sons of God were beings, divine beings, created by God, coming together to give an account on what is going on in their different domain. And the god of this earth was summoned as well, Satan. Now, if Satan had not taken that position from Adam, Adam would have been the rightful son of God, who would have presented himself before God about the affairs of the earth, because he was the first son of God before man began to procreate. He was made in the exact image and likeness of God. And so we see that Adam's position was vacated and Satan got in there, which was why when he came, the affairs asked about were the affairs of the earth. God said, "Where are you coming from?" He said, "I've been to and fro the earth." So he came as a representative of the earth because he had become the God of this world. And so you see that the sons of Elohim, the benign Elohim, were also presenting themselves before God in that council. Now, before I continue with my thoughts about the giants and the Nephilims, right, I'd like to deviate to Psalm 82. Now, the old manuscripts, the old Hebrew manuscripts, right, English version, every time I read my Hebrew Bible and I read the English, I'm like, oh, a lot of things it's subtle, but it's just lost in translation. You see that when you read Psalm 82, it's talking about God standing in the council of gods. God Most High was standing in the council of other gods, and he was saying things to them, was asking them about the assignment he had given to them. But we're not going to really delve into that. That'll be for the next video. So let's come back as well to this Nephilim. I believe that the Nephilims were not just giants, but they were hybrid in nature. They were hybrid offsprings. And the more they grew on the earth, they began to defile everything. They defiled human beings, they defiled animals, they defiled trees. It was just a mess on the earth. And men began to cry to God because there was so much bloodshed on the earth, but yet there was defilement. And so when God talks about every flesh was corrupted at that time, it says all flesh had corrupted its way in Genesis 6. We're not just talking about corruption as in sin. We're talking about defilement. We're talking about perversion, Biological perversion. When Bible talks about Noah and his bloodline being the only clean one, they were talking about the fact that they had not yet been defiled in their genetical makeup. It wasn't just about not sinning, it was about the sin against biology, the biology that God had created so expertly on the earth. And so we see that it was only Noah and his sons whose bloodline had not been perverted genetically. And so only Noah's bloodline was not touched. And that's why God decided to now hit the reset button to purge corruption and perversion, and to also preserve the purity of the human bloodline. And you realize that when we talk about the animals that were presented before Noah's Ark that God had preserved, God preserved those animals because all other animals were already defiled. We look at history and we hear of centaurs, we hear of sphinx, we hear of grotesque figures, and we don't understand how man can, or how a creature can be a hybrid between a man and a horse. But these things existed because they were offsprings of the sons of God and of men. They were the Nephilim and every other offspring that the Nephilim also birthed. And so there was corruption and perversion in the earth. And so God decided to hit the reset button because everything that he made, apart from Noah and those animals that he preserved, were defiled. And so after the flood, God promises Noah that, you know what, let's hit the reset button. I will not destroy the earth with flood anymore. And this time around, he removes the curse. He blesses them. He says, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And God blessed them and gave them a promise called the rainbow. Unfortunately, when humanity started again, a figure in history rose. His name is Nimrod. And when you look at what Nimrod means in the Hebrew Bible, it means to be a rebel. He was defiant in the face of God. Some Bible translation says he began to be a mighty man in the face of God. But the true translation, when you really study that, it's he began to become a defiant one, a Nephilim, a giant in the face of God, one who was endowed with that same rebellious spirit that was squashed in the flood. And we wonder, how did this happen? I have my theory, but because I'm online, I wouldn't say it, right? But anyway, Nimrod began to be a defiant one in the face of God. And he had this brilliant idea, in quote, to raise a ziggurat or a tower up to the heavens to bring God down and to establish their own kingdom. Of course, he was inhabited by a rebellious spirit who was pushing that agenda. But after that, in the Bible, we just go from Noah, we see the table of nations or the genealogies, and then Abraham. Now, between Noah and Abraham in history is over 300 years between them. And you realize that God was silent. In those years between Noah and Abraham, God was silent. And you wonder, where was God? Where was God for 300 years? Well, let's talk about this next time when I come back and continue to dive deeper into these benign Elohim. But one thing I would say is that between Noah and Abraham, God disinherited the nations. There was no prophecy, no prophetic voice, no divine encounters between Noah's years and Abraham because God had disinherited the nations. I'll come back tomorrow and we'll dive more into the idea of God disinheriting the nations as a consequence of the Tower of Babel. I would show you in Deuteronomy when God literally disinherited the nations, waiting for a man who would seek his face. And in that man, he decided to birth a counter nation from the Babylonian system that had been established on the face of the earth. I'll see you same time tomorrow and we'll dive deeper. Bye.